Okay, everyone, I think we'll get started. Good morning, welcome, thank you for being here. Today's topic, as I'm sure you know, is the parish budget, which was passed by chapter last week. So Betsy and Erin, our amazing finance team, are going to unravel all the mysteries for us this morning. Just let me mention while I've got your attention, next week there is no forum. We give an occasional week off from forums, but next week at noon is our annual meeting, and that's really important, and I hope you all sign in for that. And if you missed it in the Thursday email, there is an opportunity to sign up to have lunch delivered so that we can enjoy some fellowship during that virtual time. But you'll need to email Kathleen Burgess very soon in order to have lunch delivered. It's a vegan-friendly Greek salad, and you're invited to make a donation on the giving page of our website. So that's all the news I have. So before I hand over to Betsy, let us pray. O merciful Creator, your hand is open wide to satisfy the needs of every living creature. Make us always thankful for your loving providence, and grant that we, remembering the account that we must one day give, may be faithful stewards of your good gifts. Through Jesus Christ our Lord, who with you and the Holy Spirit lives and reigns one God, forever and ever. Amen. Over to you.
All right. Thank you, Penny, and good morning, everybody. It's so wonderful to see all your smiling faces. Today, Erin Sacco-Pineda, our Director of Finance, is here with me, and we're going to share with you everything you always wanted to know about St. Paul's budget, where the money comes from and where it goes. And I'm going to just start with the big picture. But first, I will say you can ask questions in the chat as we go along, and we'll have some time at the end for live question and answers. So either way you want to do it is fine with us. So starting with the big picture, every year, chapter sort of sets the agenda for the coming year in a meeting in the spring. And then Erin works with all the staff and the ministry heads over the summer and early fall and puts together a proposed budget. And then Jeff and the stewardship committee conduct the pledge campaign in the fall. And then we put all the numbers, roll them all together in December to see what we think we will have with income and what the proposed expenses are, and make any adjustments that we think are necessary to balance the budget, because that's our goal. We want to make sure that we're spending wisely and spending only what funds we have available to spend. So I'm going to share my screen, and I'll start with, let's see, there we go. Can everybody see that? Oops.
Nope.
You can't see it?
No, it's not showing up.
Oh, All right. Share screen. Oh. Uh-oh. Oh, here comes Amy.
There you go. Yes, that's it.
All right, I shared mine, Betsy. You're muted, Betsy.
Okay, I'm hearing Craig saying unmute. All right, so it's on her desktop. Okay, thank you, Erin. I am not good at this technology. All right, so Erin, do you want to go to the second slide? Okay. All right, this pie chart shows where the money comes from, and I'm going to start up at 12 o'clock if you look at the clock. So you can see that pledges, our projected pledge income for the coming year is $1.010 million. And that is the biggest part of our income. It represents 63% of all the income that the cathedral has. That together with plate income and other offerings that we get provides 68% of our income for operations. We're fortunate that we have other sources of income at the cathedral. So for example, we have program and miscellaneous income from things like Zydeco. We have facilities income from sales of columbarium niches and rental income from groups like AA and other 12-step programs. And then we have endowment funds, which are long-term invested funds that the cathedral's had for 100 years and we keep adding to. And we take a draw on those funds every year of about 4 to 5% in order to allow the funds to keep growing and not take too much. So that draw is $79,000 this year, which is about 5% of our income. Then we have special funds that people give money to Friends of Cathedral Music or outreach, other various things, showers of blessings. We have some income from that. That's about 6%. And then from the Nutmeg and Olive LLC subsidiary, they have some invested funds from the sale of the parcel of land that is now being developed. And we take a draw of that. And we're taking about a 4% draw this year of $300,000. So that's a large piece of our income. It represents about 19% for the 2021 operating budget. So our total budget this year is $1,592,000 compared with a little higher budget of $1,662,000 last year. And the reason for the decline is because we factored in our best estimate of how we think the pandemic is going to affect the cathedral's finances this year. And so we know from our experience in 2020 that we had less income this year than we had planned because we're not having in-person services. And so we didn't have plate income, which is significant for Easter services and Christmas services. And so we factored in a slight decrease in operating income for the year, and of about $60,000 of income that we think we won't have because of less rentals, less plate income overall. So that's the reason for the decrease. But you can see that your pledges and other giving during the year are by far the biggest part of our income, and that's why we place so much emphasis on the pledge campaign in the fall, because it's a really important source of our income. One other thing of note is that the income from the Nutmeg and Olive LLC annual draw is also a very significant part of our income. And we know during the development period, the LLC will be spending money to build out the new space and furnish the new space, and that will decrease the income in future years. So we already know that our income from the LLC next year is likely to decrease about $50,000 is our best, not for next year, for 2022. So we know that there's about $50,000 of income next year that we're going to need to replace from other sources. So people are busy working on that. Kathleen Burgess, our administrator, has a team of people working on alternate sources of income for the cathedral. And so that's work that's going on right now to help plan for 2022. All right, next slide. All right, this is our expense budget for the coming year, and it shows all the different areas and departments of the church and where the money goes. So we spend, starting again at noon, 11% of our budget goes to worship and liturgy, and then you can see around the going clockwise around music and the arts, Christian formation. Outreach and mission is a huge part of what St. Paul's is all about, but that area doesn't take a whole lot of funding to support it. That is an area where we have significant volunteer activity, and so we have a big ministry that's done, but with volunteers, and it doesn't take a lot of dollars. Congregational life is Jeff's area, and fellowship and hospitality, buildings and grounds, administration, and denominational obligations, which is our mission common life share that goes to the diocese. So overall, our total expense budget is $1,592,000 compared with $1,661,000 last year. And the decrease there is also due to, we think the campus will be closed until probably mid-year is our best estimate, and then opening slowly after that. So we'll have some savings. We anticipate we'll have savings in utilities and some worship expenses and things of about $60,000. In our expense budget, the biggest part of our expenses are our staffing. Salaries and benefits total about $1.1 million, and that's about 70% of the total. So that's where the money goes, is to support our staff and all the wonderful things that they do. So next slide, please. Okay, so this is 2021, getting to the other side of the pandemic. We have estimated that we're going to save about $58,000 due to the COVID adjustment, which assumes our campus is closed through June 30th. We did have a really great cost saving mid-year last year. We were able to a lease on a second very large copier that the cathedral had in place was up, and so we ended that lease and were able to save over $12,000 this year because we just have one copier now. We also, our common life share has decreased slightly because a couple of years ago, 2019, we right-sized our budget, and our common life share to the diocese is based on our operation level of operating expenses. And so because we're spending less, our common life share for the coming year is decreasing. We are anticipating some lower utility costs. And on the other side, as always, every year, our health insurance costs and other benefit costs increase, and that's an $11,000 increase. And then changes in all other expenses are about $2,500. So we're seeing a reduction of about $68,000, $69,000 in expenses next year, primarily due to the pandemic, but also due to lower copier costs, which that's great. An expense reduction that doesn't impact our operations is great. So I'm going to turn it over to Erin, and she's going to walk through each of the ministry areas in a little bit more detail. Erin?
Thanks, Betsy. Okay, so as Betsy said, I'm going to work through each of the expense departments in detail and talk about our personnel and non-personnel expenses for each. And again, I apologize for the kid noises in the background and the possibility that an orange cat might walk across my keyboard. So in the worship and liturgy area, this obviously is a primary area that our clergy spend a great deal of time, and it uses a number of volunteers, especially when we're doing in-person services. One of the things I want to note about the budget that we present today, as well as how it's presented for annual meeting, is we reformat the budget to allocate compensation costs between each of the the functional expense areas. And so we do that not based on a formal time study, but we've done conversations with each of the staff or department heads in the past. And then we try to maintain consistency with those allocations so that we're not creating significant variances in different departments between departments just because we're moving percentages around unless there's a reason to do that. So just be aware that the compensation and benefits lines in each of these department summaries includes an allocated portion of often administrative staff or possibly some buildings and grounds allocated time and clergy time as well. The other thing I want to know, I think most of you all have been to our budget forms in the past, but just as a reminder for those of you who have, and new information maybe for some who haven't, the Episcopal Church has rather robust benefits plans. And so clergy are eligible for an 18% employer or church contribution to the clergy pension. And so that's something that in addition to their cash and housing compensation that they receive, we make an 18% contribution to their pensions. Also, the staff who are eligible for health insurance, which are staff who work 30+ hours per week, get their health insurance under the Episcopal Church Medical Trust, which is a self-insured national program. And this coming year, 2021, the health insurance benefit is over $1,000 per employee per month. And so that's a rather robust benefit. And one benefit of having the medical trust with the Episcopal Church is that they've negotiated plans that have higher benefits than comparable plans that one might buy off the exchange or through a private broker. So that's something to keep in mind, again, as you're looking at compensation and benefits figures. Lay staff, non-ordained staff, are also eligible for employer contributions to their 403B retirement plans if they work 20 hours or more a week. And the way that those work is that we do a 5% of their compensation base contribution, regardless of whether or not the particular employee makes a contribution of their own to their retirement. And if they choose to make their own contribution through payroll withholding, then we will also match up to 4% of their compensation. So again, these plans that are set primarily by General Convention on the national level of the Episcopal Church is our robust benefits plans that help supplement the cash compensation our staff receive. In regard to worship and liturgy, as the slide notes, our clergy obviously are very involved, as well as a number of kinds of volunteers that support the ministry. Another specific item pertaining to clergy support this year is that the bishop has advised that deacons in our diocese should have a number of professional development opportunities made available to them, and the churches who are served by those deacons should be supporting them with covering some of those costs. And so we did have an increase in professional development, putting aside in the budget some additional money for Brooks's professional development opportunities this year and certainly beyond. In the non-personnel or direct cost area of worship and liturgy, the primary cost drivers are copy costs, which, as Betsy said, we're actually able to reduce our copying and printing costs this year by going from 2 copiers down to 1. I will say that that is not without some wringing of hands. The cathedral community, or at least staff, has gotten pretty used to having 2 copiers, so that if one breaks, there's there's, you know, one available, as well as, you know, upstairs staff, downstairs staff. For the many years we've been set up in that format. But that's a luxury most churches don't have, and our staff, when we get back into the office, are gonna get used to that, I think, and I think it will be just fine. So copying cost is a major factor, and obviously a lot of the copying is for printing of bulletins when we're doing in-person services. Another main factor in the worship and liturgy area is flowers expense, which normally are offset by donations, especially during the Easter and Advent and Christmas periods, when people are quite generous with flower donations. And then finally, another area of expense in worship and liturgy is that we cover some of the special service costs. Again, when we're not staying at home, we enjoy things like the samba dancers, and, you know, we have to pay the police to help protect us when we process around in the streets and things like that. And so those get picked up in this area. Just because, sorry about that, no kids are being harmed, and it's just a Nintendo excitement. We're using the Nintendo babysitter this morning. So the other thing I just want to note, because you'll see it throughout these slides, is the line that says special funds used. Again, most of you will know from prior years, because we've been doing this the same way for a while, is the operating budget is just one component of the full financial life of the cathedral. We have two other funds, or categories of funds, if you want to put it that way. One is the special funds, which are amounts that are restricted or designated for specified purposes. So they're set aside in funds, perpetual funds, outside of the operating budget. And in some cases, the use or the restriction on those funds is not mutually exclusive from what we do in the operating budget. And so we are able to use funds or release funds into the operating budget to offset our operating costs. And that's what those special funds used mean, where Betsy and I will review the funds on hand and determine what can reasonably be used to support the operating budget. Just to note, because I'll mention it again later, the enduring funds is the third category of funds that we have, and those are our invested funds, some of which are permanently restricted, and so we can draw just on the earnings from those funds, and others that are designated by chapter. And so again, we are drawing earnings on them only at this time, but they have been used in the past to offset budget deficits, where we could draw down designated funds by chapter deciding to redesignate or release elements that had been put there. And that will come up and once again, I think, later in the presentation. So in total, worship and liturgy, we're projecting to spend about $185,000 in 2021. The next section is music and the arts. And again, I think most of you know this area is supported primarily by our full-time music director, Martin Green, our part-time sub-organist, Gabriel, and the other area of direct compensation is for section leaders. We currently have 7 paid section leaders, and I'm going to take this opportunity to mention that in 2020, the chapter quite generously did decide to continue to pay all of our staff for their normal hours that they would have worked had we not been in the stay-at-home order. Up through September. And so although the cathedral's on-site operations closed in March, through September, all of our staff, including section leaders, continue to be paid. All of the section leaders remain employed, but are as of now and projected into 2021 being paid only for service to our current operations, whatever hours that they spend doing things to support our online worship services. The The non-personnel or direct costs of supporting the music department are primarily we budget obviously for organ and piano maintenance, and then there are special service costs, and those are primarily around Easter, St. George's Day, and the Christmas and Advent special services like lessons and carols that we have during that time, a number of those services. One of the things that's been a significant development or stewardship area that's focus for the last couple of years has been, some of you will recall, we had started a music endowment. We actually have 2 enduring funds that support music, the music area. Well, we have the Pacham Fund, which is specifically for non-operating music costs. And some of the Pacham funds were totally outside of the operating budget in the last couple of years, were used to support the piano restoration that has been going on and is just in its final completion stages. I believe it's just been returned to the cathedral, but Penny will have to quote me on that.
It was returned 2 or 3 months ago.
Yeah,
and Gabriel has played it on camera a few times.
Oh, perfect. Yes,
beautiful.
So that was supported by the Pacham Fund because, again, it's for non-operating purposes, except for organ maintenance. That was specifically called out in the restrictions on the Pacham Fund. So we do use each year a little bit of money to help support our costs of organ maintenance in the operating budget. And then, like I said, the music endowment was a significant area of development over the last couple of years and has grown to over $200,000. So that we are able to draw earnings off of that fund to support music compensation and other operating costs of the music department. So that's a really great movement forward in helping us continue this important ministry that we have. I'm looking at the chat. I don't see any questions. Pardon moi. Okay, the next section we're going to talk about is Christian formation, which would include not only our things that we do for our growing Episcopalians, but also we account for some of our adult education costs in this area. Maya Little Sana is our youth minister, and actually, maybe surprising to some of you, her role has really expanded during the stay-at-home order, and she has worked with the diocese and other youth ministry staff across the diocese to continue and grow some specific programs for our youth and children and families, as well as with some of our volunteers. We have a great cohort of active volunteers in the children's ministries. We did make a commitment chapter, I should say, did make a commitment this year. Starting in September, it increased Maya's hours from 10 hours per week to 20 hours per week, as well as increased her pay rate, and to acknowledge the work that she's been doing, the great work and the leadership role that she has continued to grow into for this ministry since we had a transition of staffing a couple of years ago. Another thing that happened in 2020 is, as I said, through September, the chapter agreed to pay all of our staff, regardless of whether or not they could fulfill their roles for hours they would normally have worked during, if we hadn't been during the stay-at-home order. At the end of September, we did elect to furlough our nursery care workers because at that point it was not clear when we might be able to return to in-person worship and have nursery services again, because of concerns around COVID, obviously, and air circulation, that sort of thing. So Maya's role, as I said, is both for youth, and she works really actively with the family and children's ministries. The direct costs are fairly minimal in this area. The Partially, it's we allocate some money for supplies and curriculum for the children and youth programs, some money for the youth group to be able to use for their activities. And then in this area under direct costs, we're also accounting for honoraria for our guest speakers and clergy, as well as curriculum costs we might have to purchase new curriculum resources and for adult ed forums and our adult ed series that we have normally a couple times a year. And the special fund that is used to support Christian formation, we have a Christian youth and family fund that we've been able to use a little bit to help each year to help offset some of those costs. The next area is outreach and mission. And Jen Zhao, our Fearless Outreach Coordinator, this is the one department that is primarily volunteer led and has been for the last couple of years. And there also is an outreach committee that Jen works with, and there are a number of folks who are involved in particular partnerships and ministries around the city and with the cathedral, and lead those different ministries. So again, the compensation and benefits area is accounting for an allocation of admin time and clergy support over this ministry, because the direct staffing, as it were, is volunteer. And I just want to say thank you to Jen for that, because that is a big piece. It's a big piece of what we're able to continue to do by having a volunteer lead that ministry and scoot everybody along. The direct costs associated with the outreach and mission department are divided into two categories. We call one category essentially cathedral activities, so things that we're doing on site, which might be something like interfaith rotational shelter, when we are hosting that or planning to host that, for example. And the other area, the bigger area, actually is grants to other organizations. So again, the outreach committee works with in partnership with a number of other Episcopal church and other organizations in town for these outreach purposes. And so we do make grants out to those organizations to support their ministries. The outreach and mission area is actually funded in large part from enduring funds that I was mentioning before. We have a number of invested funds. I think there's 10 or 12 now, different named funds, and maybe more actually. And a number of the very old ones have outreach related purposes indicated by the original donors. And so in some cases, that purpose is indicated as, for the language of the day was sick and destitute, to support the sick and destitute. In some cases, it indicates for the parish or of the parish. And in those cases, we help fund the pastoral needs fund, the clergy pastoral needs with those resources. But the bulk of them are a more general outreach related restriction. And so the enduring funds do support the outreach ministry to the tune of about $28,000 a year. So that's a big area. I've also mentioned before in a prior year budget forum that there are a number of outreach activities that don't hit the operating budget because they're what in accounting terms are direct pass-through activities. And what that means is that we are doing activities as a community led by the outreach team to raise money or other supplies, such as we do an annual shoe drive normally in conjunction with either the diocese or St. Mark's, and a backpack drive, for example, we do those kinds of activities, and those are direct pass-through activities. So when donations are made to those activities, they run, they don't actually run through our incomes and expenses. They get accounted for as we essentially are holding those funds as custodian and pass them through to the actual beneficiary organization. And we don't count those as part of our outreach ministry. Last year, I was able to share that in 2019, the total of that kind of activity was actually about $90,000 of inflows and outflows to organizations. So you can see how substantial that can be. And a number of you will recognize those examples I gave of things that we do to support the activities of our partners and of the diocese. The next area that we're going to talk about is congregational life, the congregational life department. And you can see under Jeff's name here, the variety of areas or variety of activities that are covered by this department. In terms of cost, the biggest areas are communications and the stewardship or annual drive-in plan giving events that we usually plan for. Also, Wayne is our communications coordinator. He's scheduled for 25 hours per week. And since the stay-at-home order, Wayne has definitely been doing more time, as well as I think Jeff, to do all of this online, all the online resources and getting everything set up, and certainly early on working out some kinks. So this has been obviously a big emphasis this last year, and will continue to be into 2021, not only because we don't know quite when we'll be able to return to in-person worship, but also because once we do, we know that there will be people who are not yet ready to return to in-person worship, and we'd want to continue to serve them. There have been some folks that have found the cathedral since the stay-at-home order and have enjoyed our cathedral community only through the online resources. And so we've seen that opportunity in 2020 and would like to be able to continue that going forward. So that is a big area, the communications area. Communications, again, as it's indicated, is both external and congregational. And some of the kinds of costs that we see, direct costs of that, are maintenance of our AV equipment, which many of you will recall was a fairly large project that we did for the resources that we have available inside the church and in the Great Hall for streaming and doing audio and video recording. There's also a number of costs related to cloud data storage and streaming services pertaining to compiling the online worship services and then getting it out to everybody on the various platforms. And so we've certainly encountered some additional costs in 2020, and many of those will continue as needed into 2021 and beyond. In the stewardship area, there's some direct printing costs, and the primary cost in a normal year, right, is are the events that we have with the community to both launch in good cheer our annual campaign, as well as celebrate in gathering. And in between. We also every year have budgeted for a legacy event that has been on site at the cathedral. The Legacy Circle is those people who have identified themselves as having put the cathedral in their estate or legacy documents. And we usually do an event like that in May. Obviously that didn't happen this past year. And we given that we don't think that we'll have returned to in-person activities in a robust way before mid-year, this is one of those areas where we're able to apply a COVID adjustment to expected expenses. So we've left it in the budget just as a matter of mechanics to make sure that coming into future years, we don't forget that we need to budget for such things. But this is, again, one of the areas where we've been able to apply a COVID adjustment to say we're budgeting for this, but we think maybe it's not going to happen. The special funds used for the congregational life area are primarily drawn from a fund we have that's called the Evangelism and Cathedral for the City Fund. Back in 2013, we received a fairly large gift from a donor who indicated a sort of general evangelism restriction on the donation. And at that time, the Cathedral for the City Commission was created. And so under Chris Harris's leadership and then passed to Jeff's leadership, with that staffing change, that fund has continued to be used for publicity related things, congregational events, things that we are doing that allow us to be out in the community and bringing our mission to the community. And so that's something that we do use to offset some of these communications related costs in our operating budget. I do believe that we expected that fund to have been depleted after 4 or 5 years. And so the fact that we still have a balance available to continue to be used is a really nice thing. And there are plans for using that fund for improved signage as the construction changes or finishes up, and we want to be able to know how to direct people to the new layout of the cathedral space. The next area is hospitality and fellowship, and the compensation costs go from this area are primarily primarily drawn from the sextons and our facility management staff. So if you're not around the cathedral during the week in a normal like in-person time, you might be surprised at how much time is our facility staff spend preparing for and cleaning up for different events and activities that are happening in the various spaces. So in addition to cleaning and maintenance, they're doing a lot of setting up and taking down and moving equipment from one place to another and that sort of thing. And so we allocate some of their time to this area. Also administrative support for all of these various groups and uses of the cathedral as we, especially when we are in person. One of the things we did in the budget a couple of years ago in regard to direct cost is start to isolate all of the food and fellowship related costs into this department rather than having the food and fellowship costs live out in each other department heads costs. Hospitality and fellowship is overseen by our Director of Admin Operations, Kathleen Burgess. And so it helps for her and Bob Osley, who work in partnership in this area, to sort of hold all of that, since they essentially do support all of the other ministries in this arena when a certain activity that may be a community life activity or a worship activity has a food and fellowship component. They take that part on. And so you can see how that works in conjunction. Buildings and grounds is the next section. And again, our buildings and grounds staff, supervised by Kathleen, are Bob Osley, our facilities manager, and Alex and Chuck. And that, as I noted before, that we had made a commitment to increase Maya's hours and pay rate suitable to her experience and renewed role this last year. Another change that's being made here in January for 2021 and beyond is that our sextons are bumped this year to a $15 per hour pay rate to stay ahead of minimum wage. And so that is something that Kathleen asked the chapter for, and the chapter approved, and I think was happy to approve, although I shouldn't speak for them, I guess, but I certainly was happy they were agreeable to doing that. And then Bob is one of our staff that is exempt from overtime. So he's a salaried staff. And because the California changes in minimum wage happen each year and have been for the last few years, we did make an increase to Bob's compensation in order to ensure continued compliance with those laws. And so in addition to Maya, our buildings and ground staff received some wage rate increases for 2021. The non-personnel costs in buildings and grounds relate primarily to our various facilities contracts like janitorial and the elevator maintenance, as well as security. That's a fairly big one. And utilities are in this area, as well as general and minor maintenance and repair costs. The any big ticket maintenance or repair items that we do, or I should say buildings and grounds area, we deal with outside of the operating budget through our buildings and grounds special funds. And we have both special purpose funds that where we've received specific donations for folks or from folks, and then a general fund. And in conjunction with the Buildings and Grounds Committee, Kathleen works to determine what the priorities will be for the coming year to see where the funding needs to come from for those things. But it's handled again outside of the operating budget. As Betsy said, utilities have gone down since we have not been in the building. And so that's another one of those COVID adjustment areas that we are expecting. And then finally, administration. This is the administrative team. Kathleen is the supervisor, Judy, our registrar, Molly, our bookkeeper, and myself. And as indicated, I'm a contracted part-time, not technically an employee, but as the cathedral contracts with my company to provide the services that I do. And again, the compensation and benefits in this area are allocated to some of the other areas. So what's listed here is a component, and I do have percentages if people wanted to know that detail. We can share that either offline or here at the end. We also allocate, of course, some of the dean's compensation to this area, because this is one of administration and governance is obviously one of the areas that she is most directly involved with overseeing. Direct costs of the administration are probably the hardest area for us to try to reduce in times like this stay-at-home order. And so that the direct cost of $108,000 may seem high compared to some of the other areas, but we can actually break this down fairly easily. Our property and liability insurance costs about $40,000 a year, so that's in that $108,000. Our audit costs about $15,000 a year, so that's in that number as well. And our telephone and internet services costs about $15,000 a year. And so again, those contracts are a fairly substantial part of that. A big increase this year was computer support and equipment, as the cathedral was seeking to support No, I'm sorry. Hold, please.
Just for
okay, so that was right.
Jacob will be.
So that's my parenting face. Okay, so so computer support to help people set up their home offices this year was a big component of some of the expenses we incurred.
Where's the passwords at?
Okay, and then finally, as as Betsy indicated, the denominational obligations are primarily our common life share, and
Which one is this?
that's to the diocese, and it's 10.5% of our operating revenues from 2 years prior. So I'm going to put myself on mute again because I've got a friend next to me, and see if Betsy wants to go over anything on this last slide and or take questions.
Erin, I noted as we were going through the slides that this is last year's non-updated version. This isn't the final version of the budget. So these numbers are from last year.
Are you seeing the 2021 numbers now?
See the front of the church. No,
Oh,
I'm not.
yeah.
Let's see.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. We see it, Erin.
It's okay. It's 9.
Okay. I'm having trouble with my Zoom.
Okay, so I will, I'll talk while Betsy's figuring things out. Basically, the last slide here is you'll also have access, or you'll see this slide in the annual meeting reports. This breaks out the operating budget incomes and expenses a little bit differently than we talked about in terms of narrative here. In the slides that we've just presented, in that the lay and clergy compensation are allocated in their own departments. And so you can see that our in about the middle of the slide, clergy compensation in total is about $406,000. That's benefits and salaries. And then lay compensation is about $704,000. So those are the two areas of significant commitment, as Betsy mentioned earlier. We did have, I'm going to go ahead and close that so we can see all your faces. And we did have one question in the chat about, does FOMOS, Friends of Military Outreach, have a budget? And the Friends of Military Outreach is funded by a special fund. And so that's a fund that was increased a few years ago by a rather substantial gift, and that's been used to support FOMOS's activities for the last several years. So that's one of those things that we consider exclusive from the operating budget because it's essentially self-funded.
And that's Nancy Tarbell also had a question about that for Women Together. And some of the groups, they have money in special funds that is used specifically for that group. And they have their own budgets, but it's not part of the operating budget.
There is a special fund report in the annual meeting documents. So when you guys get a chance to peruse those, later this month, you'll be able to see the special fund listing and all of the activity in 2021, as well as the balances that are being carried into the activity in 2020 and the balances carrying into 2021 for those funds.
So it sounds like those special funds aren't automatically replenished from anywhere. Somebody has to make a gift to replenish them. Is that correct?
Yes. Or as the case with When Women Together is operating normally and we have dinner meetings, people pay for their dinners. And so that is our income, and then we pay for the speaker and for the food out of that.
Yeah, and another difference between special funds and the operating budget is that those balances carry over from year to year if they're not used. So the operating budget, we're just dealing with 1 year's projected incomes and expenses, where the increases and decreases in those funds, whatever the fund balance is at the end of the year, that continues to carry forward unless it's spent for the restricted purposes.
We'll be happy to take any other questions anybody has. Well, we're very grateful for your attendance this morning, and also very grateful for everything that you all do for the cathedral. Your time, your talent, your gifts, your service. That's what makes the cathedral run. And we have such a wonderful community. It's great to see everyone here this morning, and we're looking forward to a better 2021.
Thank you very much, Betsy and Erin. You guys do extraordinary work. We came through 2020 much healthier than we could ever have expected or hoped. And the systems and the processes that you've both put in place over these last few years to make things more transparent, to make sure that we thank people for the right things at the right times, that has all been so impressive. And I'm so grateful for both of you, and for Molly, who does our bookkeeping as well. So as I mentioned at the beginning, next week there is no forum. We have a week off, but it is the annual meeting at noon next Sunday. Please be sure to make put in your order for a lunch delivery very soon to Kathleen Burgess. Peter or anyone on the formation committee, do you want to say anything about what's coming attractions in February?
Maybe Kelvin wants to say more. I think we have a speaker, Marianne Robinson, in a couple of weeks. That's as much as I know. I can't, Maybe Kelvin knows more, or Jeff?
Jeff
no,
isn't here today.
Barbara, someone else was Barbara, Harry, I think. No more.
Yes, we've got Pat Lindquist coming on February 7th.
Right.
To talk about Marianne Robinson. And then, because we've all been so delighted with the theater productions, Bill Eadie's going to talk to us about communications on the 14th, before we get into Lent.
Thank you. And note in the chat, our Dean's Warden has just said, don't forget to vote for chapter members and put it in the mail ASAP. That means tomorrow at the latest, please. The judges are planning to meet later this week and do the counting.
And Gertrude Nelson will be with us during Lent for the forums.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all for your attention, and look forward to seeing you at the annual meeting and on Zoom.